up, everybody? Just Brewing here, and welcome back to the home brewery. First things first, happy holidays to everybody that's out there. I hope you're having a good time, I hope you're safe, and I hope that you're spending this time with people that you love and people that love you. Right around this time of year, I always start to reflect, and I think a lot of people do. We start to reflect on all the things that have happened so that we can learn and get better next year. Being a home brewer and a YouTuber, I have to take advantage of that. So welcome to my first episode of A Year of Beer, where I'm going to really quickly run down all the beer that I've brewed and what I would do next time and if I would do it again. There are a lot of things that I've learned and things that I've grown on, and I'm going to try to touch on some of it, but I don't want this to be too long. If this is the kind of stuff that you like, make sure to subscribe and like if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments if you've learned from this as well or what else you've learned this year. Other than that, let's go ahead and get right into it. Generally speaking, I'm not a very meticulous person. You can ask anyone that knows me personally. I don't have the best memory, and I'm not going to take any notes on whatever's going on. That's why I'm not doing a lot of the things that I've done in the past. I'm not in school anymore. I don't write as much as I used to. I'm not writing it down. I'm not going to. So, being a home brewer, that can be a big problem, and holding on to these recipes has really helped me change a couple of those things, and I think it's helped me get a little bit better at brewing. Let's kick off my year of beer with the equipment. I think generally speaking, this was some of the biggest upgrades I made. Some of the biggest steps as a brewer I took were in my equipment. So I do want to start there. What are your recipes and your ingredients and your process? What is all that without your equipment? So let's get that started. I started out this year with a 3-vessel system. It was a 25, I think, gallon Coleman cooler. I have a 15-gallon kettle. And of course a separate kettle that I have. It was an 8-gallon, but I also have the 5-gallon. But really, there was a modge podge of equipment that helped me brew and helped me step into brewing all grain batches. I was probably using that 3-vessel system for maybe a month into 2021. I did not stick with the 3-vessel system for very long. I mean, there was a lot to clean and prepare in my day of cleaning and preparing. So it was not in my best interest to keep using 3 vessels. I was maybe doing that for a few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 beers before I took my first step into electric brewing with my Brewer's Edge mash and boil electric kettle. This is an all-in-one electric kettle. It's not modular like some of the others in the market. It is on the affordable side of the spectrum, so if you are looking to kind of step into all grain, I really, really recommend this. And this is where I noticed that my beer started to get a bit better. I did buy it used, so I didn't get the manual or anything like that. I watched a few videos on YouTube to figure out how to use it, but it's really, really simple. I only had it for like 2 hours before I started brewing on it. And I bought it used, and I bought it off a guy, brought it home, and pretty much plugged it right in. I watched a couple videos on how to, use a screen and what to expect, error-wise. And there's not really a lot that can go wrong, generally speaking. So it was really easy to use. And right once I got it here, I set it up and started brewing. That's how easy it was. So I'm really, really glad that I started with the Brewer's Edge Mash and Boil. It's a really, really good system, especially if you want to step into all grain. Now that we've got brewing equipment out of the way, let's talk about some of the other equipment that I've gotten this year. So I did start the year, as I mentioned earlier, I went from extract to all grain right around now, so right before the beginning of the year. But right once I got into all grain, I also started kegging as well. So I went from bottling my extract beers to bottling my all grain beers to almost immediately kegging my all grain beer. So that was a really, really big step too, and I think it's worth mentioning. I first bought a 1-tap kegerator off a guy off of Facebook Marketplace because that's how it works. It was not in the best condition, but it worked. It got cold when it needed to, and it worked like mostly. There were some things that I had to fix, but what you need to work did, and that's what mattered. And I got it on the cheap. I was able to fix everything else. So like, why not work on it? That kegerator was for commercial beers and not corny kegs, not for homebrew. So it took me probably about a week to figure out how I was going to dispense from it, and it was going to cost a lot more money. So I essentially, instead of swapping out the adapters and all that for the CO2 tank and the tap itself, I just decided to upgrade the whole thing, and that's when I got the Keezer that's right behind me. That was a really, really cool upgrade. Now that I've got the 4-tap system, I don't bottle as much, but I still bottle. About 90% of my beer goes into the Keezer. Some of it I take with me, so to do that, I use the growler filler. Sometimes I do bottle right after it's done fermenting, so when I do that, I'll actually get it into the keg. I'll just use a carbonation drop in the bottle after I've sanitized it, use the growler filler to fill the bottle, much like it's a bottling wand or anything like that, and I'll cap it off from there. It'll eat away at the oxygen and the sugar that's in the bottle, produce CO2, and it'll carbonate. Boom, just like any other carbonating process. Bottles and growlers are fun, but when it comes down to it, not all places are appropriate for glass, and when it comes down to that, having a canning system is really, really nice to have. There are a lot of reasons to want a canning system, but the fact that they're that much, for that much effort too, I'm probably not gonna buy a canning system. So I found something recently that has solved that problem, and that is reusable aluminum cans. I just got these and have not carbonated in them yet. I've only pulled from the Keezer using the growler filler that I mentioned. But essentially what I'm doing is I take a open line of CO2, really, again, maybe 1 or 2 pounds of pressure. I put it inside the can, turn it on for maybe like 5 or 10 seconds just to push out the oxygen that's in it from the bottom and out. From there, I will also start to fill it. So it's not perfect and it's not completely oxygen free, but it's way better than not doing that. My wife and I did a little bit of traveling recently. We went and saw family, you know, and taking glass on the road to me, I mean, there's a lot of clanking and stuff involved. So these had just come in and I wanted to see how well they worked. So I took a few and it worked out great. I mean, they hold the carbonation from the keg pretty okay. I mean, better than the growlers and bottles I've done in the past. But it's really nice that they're twist off and I can actually just use them anytime that I want. This has been out of the keg for a few days now, but this is really not that bad, all things considered. I mean, I'll take this mostly because glass is not appropriate everywhere. Now that we got packaging equipment out of the way, let's talk about fermentation equipment. Now there's not a whole lot to go over. I'll try to keep this part quick because there's only a couple upgrades that I made. So let's go ahead and talk about that. I started the year, like a lot of people, I was fermenting in a closet somewhere, just using room temp. If I knew it was going to be cold, I made sure that our house temperature always stayed within 70 to 73. There were some like temperatures, like stickers and stuff out there that came with some of the equipment I had, so I was able to kind of get a rough estimate of like how cold or warm it was in the closet. But I knew that it wasn't over where it needed to be, and it definitely wasn't under any ale temperature. So I was pretty much stuck with ales and fermenting in a closet. I did eventually start taking steps into Kvike, so I started fermenting in the garage. So a few of those beers, I just let sit in the garage, whatever. It was, the Texas summer, and you can do that here. So that was fun, but eventually I did get a fermentation chamber, as you've seen in the last few videos, and I got that, essentially it was like $90 because it was already on sale for Best Buy, and I had some Best Buy credit. Almost no reason not to use it on something like this. I got the okay from the wife to take up even more space in the garage. Happy yeast makes happy beer, so if you take care of your yeast will take care of you. That fermentation chamber was one of the other steps that I took into making sure I had some good beer laying around. Other than that, my fermentation chamber, I do have a fermentation jacket that I use that you've seen. This is really good at retaining temperature, so if I need it to stay hot, it can do that pretty well. And if I need to cool it down, I can do that too. You can use like frozen water bottles and things like that, or a heating pad or other heating sources. So that's really nice to have. I really only use the fermentation jacket when I can't use my fermentation chamber, and that's usually for a couple reasons, whether that's the yeast to like Kvike. I mean, if I want to have it at 80, 85 degrees or 90 or whatever to kind of speed things along, I can do that. I'm not doing that in my fermentation chamber. It's not going to happen. So that's really nice to have when either the chamber is full or if I need it to kind of step outside of the fermentation range that I'm currently needing to stay around. When it comes to my fermentation vessels themselves, the biggest upgrade I made there was my Fermzilla. It's pressure rated and it's clear, so it's really nice to be able to see everything that's fermenting. I can also do oxygenless dry hop and things like that now. So there's a few other small things that I've done, but at least in the vessels and equipment like that, my Fermzilla is probably the only other big upgrade that I made. Now that we've gotten fermentation out of the way, let's really quickly talk about chilling. I did this separately because there have been a few upgrades here too. I was starting off with really nothing, just ice baths in the sink, stirring my wort like a lot of us. But at the beginning of the year, having made these few steps, I did have a wort chiller. It was probably like a 25-foot copper one that I started off with, and it worked really well, generally speaking. I mean, it got the hot thing cold after a while, and it was at least less effort than doing the ice bath and stirring. So that was a decent start, but it really got easier when I got a 50-foot copper one. It's a silver one, and it's really nice. I was using the old 25-foot one as a pre-chiller, so just putting that in a kettle or a bucket with some ice water, and then letting that cold water that's running through it now go through the bigger 50-foot cooler that I have. So that chiller, the cold water going through there will cool down your wort faster. So that was a really nice upgrade. From there, I did get the Jaded Scylla, and that thing is a frickin' beast. That thing is awesome. Pairing your immersion chiller with a pre-chiller, or really any chiller with a pre-chiller, is going to save you quite a bit of time. And using what is a 50-foot copper chiller and a jaded Scylla, which is like 1,000,000 copper feet, it's not, but you get the point. It gets really, really cold, and it cools my wort super fast. I've probably cut my chilling time in half by switching to the jaded Scylla, or at least making it the main one and using the 50-foot as a pre-chiller. I mean, that has saved me so much time. There have been moments where it's been almost too inconvenient, where I'm still not ready to pitch my yeast yet. My fermenter might not be sanitized, or I might not have the yeast out. I mean, there have been moments where it's chilled too fast, and I've been trying to catch up with it, opposed to letting it catch up with me where I am in the brewing process. I've kept you waiting long enough. Let's go ahead and get to the important part in my year of beer, the beer itself. I started this year out by writing everything into this beer journal, so let's go ahead and get started. The first beer I brewed of the year was a peach wheat that I actually remember this vividly, because this was the moment that I decided to stop using the extract flavoring, you know, the little tiny 4-ounce bottles of flavoring. This was the beer that told me to stop. And those small extract flavorings, though they're very convenient, taste terrible. They may give you a bit of that flavor, but personally I can taste the how low quality the flavoring is. So I've never used it since this beer. I maybe have literally did once, because I was not going to spend another $50 on fruit to make a puree, so I got these instead. But this was the beer that had me change my mind. Moving on, this was actually the first beer I brewed in my mash and boil. It was an Irish red ale. Moses, if you're watching this, he was a friend of mine that came and helped me with this brew day, because I knew I was going to need some help. And he was a photographer friend of mine, so I was like, you know what, let's just come over, we'll figure something out. Just, you know, we'll do some videos while you're here. So he helped me with that, and it was my first beer in my Brewer's Edge mash and boil. Moving on was an Imperial Coffee Stout that I was trying to do. I remember this. I was trying to do what I know now to be called a party guile beer, where you have one set of grains and you brew 2 beers out of that using essentially different batches of sparge water. You can batch sparge, if you're familiar with that, with a grain build that's high enough and strong enough. The beer it can support, you know, like a 9% beer. It may support like a 4% one. If you've got like a couple more gallons of water that you can sparge with, you may be able to get another beer out of that. And I tried that with what should have been an Imperial Coffee Stout, but it actually only turned out to be like 7% or so. So that's definitely like higher. I would say maybe like a robust stout instead of an imperial one. Here in the journal, I actually, this is not crazy important, at least not relevant to the recipes themselves, but this is when I got into water chemistry. So Steve, apartment brewer, if you're watching this, your video was really what got me into this. If you can, pause it and zoom in or whatever. But this is literally like, I just took notes directly off of your video and was just writing out everything you said so I could figure out water chemistry. One of the other things you can do to start making better beer. Definitely recommend. Moving on, we are now into February, late February of this year, and it was my first New England IPA. I remember this. I actually, I've missed the mark on all my hazies. I think literally once it tasted good for like 3 days and then was no longer a hazy IPA. So weird things happen when I brew hazies because they're very, very, very particular. So this did not, this exactly, this held up. Every single time I've brewed a hazy, something has gone wrong. And this is where that snowball started rolling. My next beer, it's now February, 21st, so 2/21/21, super cool date. I actually brewed my first strawberry kiwi blonde. I did this a couple times, but I made a strawberry kiwi puree out of like 4 pounds of each, I think, maybe 5 pounds strawberry because I wanted more strawberry than kiwi. I don't mind spending the money on quality. Like I knew that this was gonna make me a decent puree, especially if I'm making it myself. I know exactly what's gonna come of it. As long as I don't mess anything up, it should turn out fine. We are now on the last day of February. It's now February 28th, but this one's called Golden Hour. It was supposed to be a Belgian orange triple, but turned out to be like a double because once again, I mashed too high. Oh, we are now, this is actually a double brew day, remember this. I brewed a chocolate milk stout. This was another one that I did on nitro. and I called it Brown Bessie. I actually did a split batch and did I bottled half, and I still have some here, which is cool to think about. And I brewed the rest on nitro and did like a side-by-side. I did like a personal side-by-side. I didn't end up doing a video for it, but it was really cool to brew what I was hoping was another breakfast beer. I don't know why, but I love brunch. I don't know why. I was really hoping to find a beer that you can, have while people are having mimosas or Bloody Marys. I figured I'd make it myself. This one kind of missed the mark too. Then I actually went on a little bit of when you brew 2 and 3 beers in a week, because I actually brewed 3 beers this week. When that happens, you end up not brewing again for a while. So I actually didn't brew for another month. And this is when I'm starting to do my first phase of beers for my wedding. For those that don't know, I got married in August, and I brewed all the beer for it, and I did a test run. And this is when that test run is happening. So I actually brewed 4 beers across 2 different weekends, but it was Wedding Smashers on March 21st. It was a Smash IPA. At the time, I did Maris Otter and El Dorado, because I really like El Dorado as a hop. But Maris Otter got really expensive, so next time I do it, I didn't end up using Maris Otter. That's a really expensive grain for the most part. But it was a really good beer, and I'm definitely going to try to perfect my Smash IPA game, definitely. The next beer I brewed was also for my wedding, Light of My Life. It's a pseudo lager, American Light Pilsner, and it was actually a really, really, really good beer. My first pseudo lager, and I did not use Lutra. I used White Labs California Ale Yeast, WLP001 for those that want to know. Really, really good beer, and again, my first pseudo lager, and I actually almost, dare I say, fell in love with pseudo lagers. I really wanted to see how good I could make a pseudo lager and see how close I could get, to a traditional lager using ale yeast. So I kind of got like fascinated by the style. So that was really cool. I kind of forgot that I did this so early. The other beers that I did for my wedding, again, I'm brewing all of these like in the same weekend, was Sour Special Day. This is a raspberry sour. For this, it was my first time using Philly sour yeast. The next beer for my wedding, the following weekend, was Hazel Nuptials. This is a hazelnut porter, one that I won't say that I'm perfecting, but this is one of my favorite beers to brew. It's a really, really simple porter recipe. It's actually a pecan porter recipe, but instead of roasted pecans, I'm adding roasted hazelnuts. So I went and got 2.5 pounds of hazelnuts, roasted them, and used California ale yeast yet again to brew this. So that was a lot of fun. Really, really like this recipe, and it's one that you may see a few different times. Up next is the first beer in April, and we have what some people know, not everyone knows I did this, but I brewed a bourbon barrel aged dark cherry Belgian quad. That is a lot of things, but it's probably the most complex and probably the biggest, boldest beer I've ever brewed. But the point is it's a celebratory beer. It's my celebratory beer. So if I'm going to a place in which we're celebrating something, I'm going to open one of these. Every anniversary that I have with my wife, we're going to open one of these. This is a really special beer to me, and I apologize for getting mushy throughout all this, but this is probably like one of the beers that means most to me. I'm really glad we got here. Up next, we have a Mexican pseudo lager. Now, this is the second pseudo lager I've done already, and at this point, we do like Mexican lagers here. I'm actually drinking one right now. And this one in particular, I remember because we added a cup of lime juice right into the keg. I don't even remember how many limes, but I cut them all up, juiced them myself, and then added it into the keg. And it was great at first. It was super, super good for the first like 3-4 days, probably 5 days. But after that, something about the lime juice in there just didn't sit right with the beer, and it did not taste great after that first week or so. But I remember vividly that this eventually kind of went downhill after the first week. And here we are into May. We have what is now my second hazy IPA, Stargazer. This was supposed to be a double hazy IPA, but I was hoping I kind of tried to make it my own, and it didn't really work. It didn't really work out that way. This was actually one of the first beers I had it's probably the second beer I poured out entirely. It was not good. I had a couple sips and it just did not go great. I mean, it didn't look oxidized, it didn't look infected or anything like that. This was just a bad brew, and that's mostly in process. That's on me. But I remember this vividly because it was my first lesson learned video. Never forget, never forget. Moving on, we have the Cocoa Puffs Porter. Now, this one is actually the first edition of it, the first time I did it. And the video never saw light of day. That happens around here. I do want to do it again. I did do it a couple more times, but this is one that I also want to perfect. I don't do that often, but this is going to be a beer you may see again. Moving on, we now have my Tropical Stout. This was a beer I brewed in a corny keg, actually. I fermented it in a corny keg. My first time brewing a beer, or at least fermenting one under pressure. And I remember this vividly because I used what was, I think, the rest of my El Dorado. I was like, I want a hoppy beer, but I also want like a stout, something like a stout. So I brewed a tropical stout because that exists. Big shout out to Homebrew Challenge because these are, I now know a bit more about all the official beer styles. And this is one of them. So that was really cool. Moving on, we're now at the end of May, and we just brewed a strawberry mango wheat beer. This is actually a really cool beer because it was one of the other, when it comes to these types of fruited wheat beers, I essentially stick to the same recipe. So the other wheat beers that you've heard me mention, the peach wheat and the strawberry kiwi wheat, wow, I missed that. Both of those beers were brewed on the same recipe as this one. So all of these share the same grain bill. So this actually made it into my wedding lineup, which is really, really cool because this was a beer that I could brew quickly, and it was really good. So that was a good beer, really good beer. Here we are into June with what is now my second test run of my wedding beers. I started them in March. I started testing them in March, my first batch at least. My second batch, here we are in June, in prep for my wedding in August. So here we are with Wedding Smashers Mark II. And this time I'm using Two Row and Cascade instead of Maris Otter and El Dorado. Up next we have Mach 2 of my Cocoa Puffs Porter. Once again, got the footage, didn't upload it because the beer didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. But this time I remember very, very vividly because I was using what I think was like 4 or 5 pounds of Cocoa Puffs in this. What I thought was a good idea was to put 1.5 pounds in the boil, like as a whirlpool. So I was like, oh, it's going to extract the most flavors. It's not going to bitter. This will work. It did not. I ended up absorbing like 1/3 of the volume in adding all this cereal in, and it got super, super thick. And I was hoping to end the boil. I added it like 5 minutes in, and I literally cut the heat and was stirring. And I was like, man, this is not going to work. And eventually, because I put so much in there, eventually when all the Cocoa Puffs made it in, it was just so thick that I had to light my burner again and get it back to a boil. Actually, rather to be specific, I transferred it out of my electric kettle and into my propane system, into my separate kettle, so that I could boil it again because it got so thick. So that was really cool, being able to do that and failing at that so quickly. Next time I do it, I know not to do that. Moving on, we're going to close out June with another pseudo lager. This is probably I think this is the third one now, and I remember this one in particular because I was planning on using lager yeast. I thought this was going to be my first lager, and I ended up using Lutra instead. So we're starting off July with my raspberry sour special day. This one was a little different. I did use Philly sour for it, but instead of fresh raspberries, because this was going to be a 10-gallon batch, I did Vintner's puree. I got 2 cans of raspberry puree and put 1 can into each fermenter because I was just using 2 5-gallon buckets. And then I just pitched Philly sour right on top of it because that's how you do it. Up next, we have Light of My Life 2.0. So again, these are going for the wedding, and this is another 10-gallon batch that I did. I remember this because the ABV was out the wazoo. I was not expecting such a high efficiency out of my mash. Last time I did this, they were at like 4-something%. This one clocked in at like 7. My original gravity was 1069, and that was not at all what I was expecting. And this finished up at like 1013, I think. So this was a very, very strong, what I can almost call imperial pseudo lager. This was like twice as strong as I was expecting it to be. So, and yeah, using my big mash tun opposed to like the electric kettle, I saw a really big spike in efficiency. So that kind of explains what happened, but I was not at all expecting it. I was not expecting that beer to be that strong. Up next, we have Wedding Smashers 3.0. So the first one was Maris Otter with El Dorado. The second was Two Row and Cascade. This is another Two Row Cascade because I want to, this was for my wedding, and I wanted to make sure the first time around that this was going to work. And since it did, I stuck with it. Up next, we have my Hazel Nuptials 2.0. So this is now the second time that I'm brewing the hazelnut porter. This one is for the wedding. So I remember this because I made sure to add a lot more hazelnuts. I'm pretty sure I did like double the hazelnuts this time around, which is a lot. I'm pretty sure I did like 4 pounds of hazelnuts, and it cost like $70 because we went to, I think it was Whole Foods where we got it, and it was just expensive. It was just really, really expensive for the hazelnuts, but I wasn't gonna swap. I wasn't gonna swap and do like pecans or anything, and I definitely wasn't going flavoring. So I was like, well, I want to make sure it's fresh. I want to make sure it's good. I have to spend the money. Here we are at the middle of July, just past it actually. So the strawberry mango wheat made its return. This one I remember in particular because I actually swapped for Lutra. And just like that, now there's obviously a lot more left in the book, but this is when I swapped to Brewfather. I was kind of doing a little bit of both at the time and leaving the recipe and the ingredients in my phone, but then using, physically writing out this other things that I was doing, my gravity readings and all that. Having to do both, I found myself, I slowly just migrated to my phone on accident and just ended up writing it all out in, Brewfather's app. That's kind of eventually what happened from there on out. So I'm not going to use the book anymore. So throughout August, I didn't really end up brewing, mostly because I didn't have time. I got married right in the beginning of August, and then we immediately went on our honeymoon. And there wasn't a whole lot to do when I got back, mostly because there was still a lot of beer to drink. I brewed like 30 something gallons, probably a total of 40 if you count some of the other stuff that I brought. And I brewed a lot of beer for it, and not all of it got drank at the wedding. So we did end up getting back to the house with a lot of beer, and I stopped brewing so I could finish what was on tap, so I then could have space to brew. So my next beer wasn't until September actually. So I went almost an entire month without brewing and brewed an American Amber. I remember this. If I remember correctly, it was one that I added Citra at the very end, just kind of see what was going to happen. I ended up throwing in an ounce of Citra during a whirlpool, and though the beer tasted fine, it tasted good, the Citra did overpower some of the notes that you would expect out of an American Amber. I think some of the citrus notes that it offers, I do think some citrus is really good for an American Amber, but you do want the maltiness and some of the other peppery and spice flavors to come through. Mostly it's just a lot of citrus flavor, and there wasn't enough malt or pepperiness to kind of back it up. So if anything, it was kind of like a very malty, kind of a malty IPA, if anything. It wasn't bad, it was good, but it was not American Amber. And that's all on me, all because I wanted to toss in a little something into the beer. Up next, we have what was my Session Hazy. Now, this is where, almost halfway through September, this was my single hop Session Hazy IPA. And the beer itself tasted fine, but it wasn't hazy after 3 days. It was really only hazy for the first 2 days. And that's probably because I didn't add quite enough hops. In my head, since it was a Session Hazy, I just added less hops, and the single hop in this was Citra. Good hop, but I didn't really add enough. And since I didn't dry hop. So since I didn't dry hop, there was not a lot of hop matter in the air, or at least in the beer. So it cleared up probably 2 or 3 days after being in the keg. By the time it was fully carbonated, it was no longer hazy. And I was not a fan of that. The beer tasted fine. I still put up the video, but it was not what I was hoping for. After my Session Hazy, we have what I called my trash can stout. Now, I know that may sound a little unappealing, but I called it a trash can stout because I had a lot of leftover hops. These were ones that were just kind of stored, and like I said, it was half of an ounce left over, or whatever amount was left over, and I didn't want to throw it away, so I held on to it. And eventually it comes to a point to where you have to either get rid of it, throw it in the trash, or throw it in the kettle. So I figured this stout was going to be exactly that. All the hops that I had were really just, we're looking at Chinook, Willamette, East Kent Golding, Sovereign. These are all hops that are probably best used in beers like darker ones. And I thought this was a really good idea, doing a what I call trash can stout. Just finding all the hops, getting all these hops that I can't, otherwise I would need to throw away. Let's just put them to use instead. Up next, we have my 3-day IPA. I say 3-day because I was expecting this to take 3 days from grain to glass, but it actually ended up taking pretty much 1 day. This was a full-on experiment, probably the most experimental beer I've ever done. I took every shortcut and everything that I could to save as much time in fermentation, really. The beer was fine, and it served the purpose for what we had. We were having a party, and I wanted to make sure that I had another beer on tap, and I only had a week, so I wanted to see how fast I could do it. And it works technically, but I wouldn't do it again. Up next, we have another orange triple. Now, this is probably the third Belgian triple I've done, the second specific orange triple I've done. And I remember this because it was a good beer. I think I may still have some on bottle somewhere. But this one I remember because I actually got the expected everything. I hit my targets. Like that doesn't happen every beer. And I remember this because I couldn't help but think, what about the last Belgian triple I did, the orange triple I did? This one actually worked really, really well. This one went exactly the way it needed to. Up next, we have the Cinnamon Roll Porter. We are winding down in the year, and there's only a few more beers left. And this is actually one of my more recent videos, and every beer I have from here on out, I'm pretty sure I did a video for. And this one kind of stands out because I added, a couple pounds of fresh cinnamon rolls right into it. A lot of what the cinnamon rolls, the fresh cinnamon rolls added, kind of got drowned out by the hops and the yeast. So I probably won't do that part again, but adding the vanilla and cinnamon at the tail end, beautiful idea, awesome idea. And just make sure to watch how much cinnamon you add. It's a very strong spice. And I kind of had to swap to nitro on that because of that. So that recently kicked and that was cool. Really, really good beer. From there, we have the Blackberry Sour. Now, this one wasn't a full-on sour, so I should probably change the name. But it did, I do think it qualifies as a Goza based on, all the other things that it did offer. Super good, and I would definitely do it again. But this time around, I would definitely want it to be more sour. On its own, it was kind of tart though. So that was kind of cool to see that even though I made the mistake, it still kind of hit the mark. At least a little bit. It nudged the mark, just a little bit. Up next, we have the Honey Blonde 2.0. This is the first beer that I brewed as an all grain batch, following essentially the same recipe from my extract days. Of course, instead of the extract, it's all grain. So that was a really, really cool contrast I was able to do, and it kind of what started me reflecting on all the beers that I've brewed to this point. Up next, we have my Hoppy Pale Ale. This one was a lot of fun to do, mostly because I already had an IPA and I was hoping for something a little bit more soft on the hop presence, but also light, drinkable, and it didn't offer any bitterness. I did not want very much hop bitterness because I had an IPA, or at least I was working on one. So I didn't want another IPA. So I went with the Hoppy Pale so I could get the hop flavor that I wanted while leaving the IPA bitterness behind. So if you do like hop flavor, or at least want to try a good beer that's not too bitter, maybe try something like a Hoppy Pale. It was a really, really good middle ground for a lot of reasons. Really good middle ground. Up next, we have a tried and true Mexican lager. I mentioned it earlier, we love Mexican lagers here. I've been going from pseudo lagers to real lagers, and this has Mexican lager yeast. It's following a Mexican lager recipe pretty much. It's not a Mexican lager, like typical Mexican lager hop. And the video coming out, so you'll know specifically what I mean. But this was the first real Mexican lager that I brewed, the first real beer that I actually lagered. This is technically the last beer I can show you that's already made and in a glass. So that does kind of suck. But I do have 3 more beers that are fermenting as we speak. Generally, I would like to kind of keep this kind of stuff under wraps, but I guess you could say 'tis the season. There's no point in hiding the beers that I'm gonna brew later, and if anything, if you've made it this far into the video, you deserve to know what I'm brewing next and what the videos are coming next. The beer that I'm gonna discuss next is one that actually was the first beer I brewed on my most recent system upgrade. We'll go ahead and say it. It's an Imperial IPA that I brewed on a Clawhammer supply system. I got this while it was on Cyber Monday sale. It showed up the same week, and I had to get brewing on it. I set it up, which was a little bit tough at first, but once I got it set up, I ran some tests with it to make sure that the heating element worked and that it wasn't going to leak or anything like that. And the following day, I'm pretty sure I ended up brewing, the next day. And it was an Imperial IPA. I maxed this thing out, and you'll see the video when it comes out. But this was what was supposed to be like a 20-pound grain bill and a full pound of hops and double IPA yeast. I mean, I was going all in on this, and this essentially takes the cake on most expensive beer. And it's still fermenting as we speak. It's going on now day 21 in the fermenter, and I'm probably going to leave it alone for another few days before I keg it and carb it. So this thing I can't wait. And this is one that I'm going to take with me to Asheville, for those that know. So CH, if you're still with me, this may be one that you get to taste. And I may send this one off for a competition. We'll see if there's an Imperial IPA or at least double IPA category that I can submit it to. If it tastes good, I may submit it. And here we are, the very last beer of 2021, the last beer that I'm going to brew this year. And it's, again, still fermenting now, but it's a chocolate porter. Far less exciting than some of the other beers, I know. But what's cool about this one, it was actually the first time I used a tincture using some Tito's, which is in Austin. You know, Tito's is a very popular vodka, but it's actually out of Austin. We had some on hand, and once I saw that we had plenty for what could be, you know, just to cover 4 ounces of cocoa nibs, I went for it. You'll see what I mean when I upload the video for it, but it was the first time I made a tincture. And I actually just added the cocoa nibs like yesterday, I'm pretty sure. So that's gonna sit just like the other beers. It's gonna sit a couple more days before I decide to keg it. But this was a really cool one because I could smell, like I just like smelled the tincture, and it was a lot of chocolate. And I even tasted the, I got a sample of it when I was adding that while the fermenter was open. And it's gonna be a great beer, I can't wait. This is the other one that I'm considering submitting to a competition. So we'll see. Yeast, if you're still here and you're watching this, let me know what styles you're submitting for, and maybe I'll jump in there with you. We can compete together, bud. But that pretty much does it for all the beer that I've brewed this year. That was like kind of a lot of beer. I didn't really realize, I never counted like how many beers. But at least in here, that's 30 that I've brewed, and the rest are all in here. So it's probably a good like 50 beers that I've brewed this year. That's a lot of time and money spent, but I think it was well spent. It introduced me to you, so you watching this video, that means a lot to me. So like we are able to connect because of me brewing all these beers and doing all this stuff in my garage. So big thanks to you, and big thanks to everyone that's watching this still and continues to watch and support me and all the steps I've taken at this point. I mean, we're now just over 700 subscribers, which is a little different, and that's something that I would think about saying. I don't brew beer for subscribers. I don't upload videos for subscribers. Really, I'm just uploading videos I want and ones I want to watch, and from time to time I will do something a little clickbaity or do something for the industry, for the community. But for the most part, this channel exists and these beers exist because I want them to. I want to brew beer. I want to brew beer that I want to drink, and I want to upload videos that I would watch. So a lot of this is for me, but thank you for being with me, a part of this journey. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So cheers. Thanks for viewing Just Brewing. Easy, NBC. Easy.